Hello, everybody. This is Sarah Colada with Architecture Talk Tongue. I have another historical moment here, a third person from Monograph joining us today to speak a little bit. This time, it's a special moment because Robert Yuen, who is my guest today, is the founder of Monograph, a company that I support because I love what they're doing. And I won't tell you much because I'll let Robert to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about Monograph, and we can deep dive a little bit as well to why he started this business in the first place. So, shall we start? Robert, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I think you could give a really good articulation of Monograph now that you've already interviewed two critical team members here already. But Monograph is really simple. We help architects manage their time and projects. Some can say that we're practice operations software. Some can say we're performance management software. At the end of the day, our goal and our mission here is to really be in service to architects and help them understand the business side of their practice and the business side of their projects.
That sounds amazing. It's so important to be able to get that sentence clear and to the point, and I think you nailed it. But perhaps before we start talking about the software and the company, tell us a little bit about yourself. It's really interesting to know where you're from and what even got you started to solve that problem specifically for architects.
Uh, Love to tell a story. I don't know if this podcast is long enough to get like the whole story, so I'll do my best to give like the short version.
I mean,
Born and
we've
raised,
got time. I never
great.
really keep the clock like this. We have some podcast episodes that are 20 minutes and some go up to an hour. And it's always been like that. Why stop someone from speaking if there's an interesting story to unravel? So
Wow.
go
Well,
ahead.
you're just asking for my entire life story, so we're gonna need a little bit more time. Just a heads up for everyone. Uh, I grew up, born and raised in Chicago. So always been in the Midwest. My parents are immigrants from China, from the southern part outside of Hong Kong, and we grew up really, really poor. My dad worked in restaurants. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. I have two younger brothers. I'm the oldest. In an immigrant family, I bear the responsibilities, and that carries with me till today. Like I still feel like I am the head, right? So I bear the responsibilities of this company, of my family, of my extended family. My love for architecture started when I was really, really little. The only toys my parents could afford was Legos. So it's not like an exciting story because I feel like a lot of architects have a very similar story, and it starts with their passion for building. Starts with the passion with Legos. It starts with the imaginations of like how do you can construct spaces. That continued with me, and I went really lucky. I went to a high school that had an architectural course. So I studied architecture actually in high school. And my first architectural job was an internship while I was still in high school. So I must have been maybe 16 years old when I first started working in an architectural office as an intern,
Wow.
reorganizing the material library. Also, I think fairly common across a lot of architects' uh, beginnings. I stayed local. I studied my bachelor's of architecture at the University of Illinois. I competed in an international competition, the Lyceum competition, where I placed first. Really lucky. The first place prize was a traveling fellowship, um, which I spent the next 11 months of my 21-year-old self traveling the world. I think around 22 countries in 11 months.
Oh,
It was a
wow.
phenomenal experience. Spent a lot of time in Europe. I spent a lot of time in Asia. I came back. I took my professor out to dinner to say thank you. And he gave me, well, he asked a really important question. What are you going to do now? I just said, like, well, I kind of ran out of money. I'm back at home. I think I need a job. He was like, yeah, start on Monday. Um, so I worked for my professor for the next 2 years before getting to University of Michigan for my MArch. I stayed on another year to do an MS, focus on digital technologies, robotics, and digital fabrication. I did about a year at SOM Chicago. Uh, it was amazing. I eventually decided to leave and move to California. And I've done mostly high-end residential, some prefab work, some design build work before making my way into tech. So that's like the really short version of what can be hours and hours of fireside chat.
Yeah, what an interesting personality, and thank you so much for sharing that because it's great actually to connect with so many different parts of that story. You know, personally, I love traveling, but also the fact that you went into practice and you worked through in university and did your BA, MA in architecture. It means that you probably have a very similar sort of background and of understanding the industry and how it educates us into architecture. And so that leads me to my second question, which is why shift into technology and what was the story behind that?
Contains a built-in screen reader called Oh, I'm sorry. I have a Mac that I'm trying to reset.
That's okay. Technology is talking to us.
It is. I apologize. You can see that
Okay.
I have a Powell laptop. The company's growing, and we don't. I'm still responsible for setting up all the new computers. But with that, I think, can you repeat the question?
Sure. So the question was really why you moved to tech. But I kind of connected it to the fact that, of course, if you're educated an architect, you have a very kind of specific outlook on your job, your sort of skill set, and how that applies really in the big world out there. And it's interesting that you kind of left that behind and moved into developing a tech product. So what was the story behind that?
I never planned it. I think my interest in tech has always been there.
Mm-hmm.
I never fully, let's say, accepted that. But if you look back and reflect, my second master's was specifically in digital technologies, where I wrote a
Yeah.
lot of code and played with robots. Um, I did a lot of grasshopper work when I was in practice. I did a lot of visual coding and visual scripting when I was in practice. And I played with a lot of computers when I was much younger. So I think looking back, like it was a good, let's say, combination of two different interests coming
Mm-hmm.
together. It was never planned. Like I was about to get licensed as an architect. I wanted to make buildings. And I think meeting my two co-founders, Alex and Mo, kind of like sparked that transition.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like you just navigate through life sometimes not knowing that this is the path, and it turns out to be an amazing path. So
Mm-hmm.
I can't
I'm going to
can't
ask
give it.
you about specifically the story of funding Monograph, but didn't you ever feel like you've been walking away from your design career and didn't feel attachment to being an architect and that idea?
I I don't know. I don't think so. Like what I do a lot every day now is like I've repurposed the definition of architecture for me. So
Mm-hmm.
I want to make that clear. Like this is not like a definition of architecture to be applied to everyone. But like when designing spaces, well, I design orgs now. I design a company,
Mm-hmm.
design a product. I design ways to facilitate and help people that I care about, which are architects. So I don't feel like I've walked away from architecture. I feel like I've applied a different meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Or another way, like I feel like the canvas that I used to work off has just changed, but I'm still the same person, and I still feel like I'm building and curating. It's just the canvas and the medium in which I curate is now slightly different.
Mm-hmm. I love that, what you just said, because it's kind of a shift that you make from architect to entrepreneur. And I think building your own business is very much kind of connecting those building blocks and still growing and developing, problem solving. So actually a lot of those, and actually implementing a vision as well, a lot of those elements just carry through to being an entrepreneur. Anyway, so tell us a little bit about the founding story of Monograph. What happened there exactly?
Well, before Monograph, myself, Alex, and Mo, we started a design agency. So we were an agency where technology companies and larger architectural companies will hire, and we would build software for them, custom software most of the time. Um, and that business went really really well. Like we got a chance to solve a lot of problems for really big tech companies. We got a chance to solve a lot of problems for smaller companies. And whenever we weren't working on client work, um, we were thinking about what we can build for the people we care about. So Monograph took many different lives before it became to this version. But it was one day we were just sitting around having happy hour with our friends, and all of our friends were architects. And the conversations are almost always the same. I'm behind on my deadline. I'm working a lot of hours. I'm trying to coordinate between two different phases between the architect and the consultants and the GC. We're over budget again. I don't know how, but we are. Um, and like I can solve that problem. And I think that's where the beginning of Monograph starts. Like it's a problem that kind of persists everywhere within the industry, and I think we can solve it. And I think it starts with like first understanding time. We need to understand an architect's value, uh, but we also need to understand that the industry is a service-based industry, um, and we need to understand time, and that's where the product started. Fast forward, and now we solve a lot more things than just timesheets, but it did start with time.
I love that. Would you tell us more about time? I mean, you devoted a lot of time to figure out how to best measure it, how to quantify it, how to put value on it, put focus on it. So tell us a little bit more. What can we learn from that process as architects?
I, so I think of it a little bit like working out. Like to fully understand something and fully like get to, let's say, a physique that you want, and you can tell if this is also a video. I'm not like a very big guy, but I want to stay healthy. And the first thing we need to do is just track. Um, so like do nothing really really fancy and just track, and that's where we should start. And then over time, you can layer on intelligence. And intelligence should be based off of like your personal historical performance. So what we've learned with time is simply just track it. What we've also learned with time is no one likes tracking it. Uh, so the experience of how you track really matters. Because like if the experience is bad, then you're definitely not going to do it. So we focus which is a great design project for most architects, because that's a design problem. We can definitely spend some time designing the experience of how you track time to ensure that it's a really desirable experience. And the confidence around like if it's a desirable experience, you do it more often. If it's a desirable experience, because you're doing it more often, it's more accurate. And because it's more accurate, as the company evolve and grow, we have a more accurate track of how you've tracked time, and we can definitely then start to optimize and start to predict and start to facilitate the next level of like managing time.
That's so fascinating. I love how you said that no one likes to do it. Why do you think that is? Is there like is there a specific reason, or are we just have bad habits around it generally as architects?
Uh, I think it's bad habits, but I wouldn't subcategorize to just architects. I think it's like working out, right? Like most people say they want to work out, and most of us do not. It's not that we don't want to be healthy, but maintaining a routine, and putting in the hard work is sometimes it's hard. But we know it's important. It's important for me to go on a walk. It's important for me to get my heart rate up. Do I do it all the time? I have to be honest. I'm not the greatest, but it's something that I constantly need to improve on. I think tracking time is a very similar behavior. Um, it's not that architects are just bad at it. It's just it's another let's say, cadence within our day, another rhythm that we have to like practice.
Mhm.
And we need to practice because it's important.
Such a great insight. I wanted to deep dive a little bit more into practice operations. We work with a lot of practices, of course. What are the common mistakes that practices make outside of time tracking?
The first one is they don't track, right? You can't have like a really good working operations if you don't track, because like I don't know what you're operating against. So having some, even if it's not on Monograph, it's just really important to like track what you think and believe is the most important uh, metric, or the most important, let's say, indicator, day in and day out.
Hmm.
The sec- the next thing that are like really common faults is like, I see this a lot, is where you do track, but like the data is wrong. And you see this a lot with a lot of firms, because they've either used archaic software, or they've used tools that look like it was built in the 80s and have never left the 80s. Um, the, the problem with that is everyone is tracking, but everyone's also fudging their numbers. Right? Like you're either rounding up or you're rounding down, and it's not accurate. It's not even close to
Hmm.
accurate. Uh, and this is pretty common. Like I can speak from experience. Like I would do a 60, 70 hour week at a firm and log 40.
Hmm.
Well, where
Hmm.
did the extra 30 hours go? Well, it never made it to the system. Uh, so it doesn't help me, because then my principals don't know that I've spent an extra 30 hours on that
Yeah.
week. It doesn't help the principals, because like they're trying to make future plans on the 40, not on the 70. So the
Hmm.
problem compounds, right? So like the next time you have a project, the principal's like, oh, like you can do this because like based on our timesheets, you've done it before. And I was like, oh my God. Uh it's kind of like a double-edged sword. I did my timesheets, but because I've kind of lied on my timesheets, now the principals are making strategic decisions on it, and it comes back to me.
Yeah.
Expectations
Therefore, you have to overwork again,
again.
probably because they think that you generated that result in 40 hours, whilst in reality it took you double the time. And since you
Correct.
didn't communicate it, it also like really affects expectations, right?
So this is why not only collecting data is important, but the accuracy of that data is so important. And I think it's really important for every architect and young designer to understand the impacts. I know I didn't, which is why I'm working on Monograph, which is also why like I really want to try to surface this conversation more, because I think young designers don't understand sometimes that what what they're doing could impact their next project, and can impact the culture of the firm, and could impact like how the principal or the owner thinks about like the future work and how they plan and staff against it. um, every architect and designer has an influence, and like the accuracy absolutely matters.
Hmm. So interesting. So I'm guessing the second part of this whole deal is money. Time is money, and it links directly into budgets. So tell us a little bit more about that relationship, especially when it comes to project planning and then client relationships.
It's really important. Like I said, we all of us as architects want to design incredible spaces. That's no doubt. I've never met an architect that does not want to design incredible spaces.
Hmm.
What we need to do is design incredible spaces within the budgets that we have. If not, it's not a sustainable business. If it's not a sustainable business, you might not have a business for very long, and that's bad, right? Like that means your ability to create spaces might, at least for practice, come to an end. Um, so understanding the relationship between like the time and your budget is really, really important. At minimum, recognize that you have to at least run payroll.
Hmm.
As a firm owner, you're responsible for like your team's livelihood, for your team's let's say ability to afford a living wherever you're based, to take care of their families, to maintain a roof over their head, to make sure you put food on the table, and still have enough freedom to be creative. Really, really important. So to work on projects in a sustainable way is really critical. So at minimum, understanding what your average billable rate based on salary is like a first step. Based on profit and margins of profit will be like a second step. And that should be mapped towards like how an architect plans for a project. So you at least know your threshold. Like if I hit this mark, I am profitable. I can dip a little lower, but I need to maintain this level to run payroll. If I go under that line, we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I wanted to ask you actually about project organization in this case. Tell us a little bit more how you organize that work. Obviously, there's just so many things you have to do. And I think that before we get into the habit of using tools like this, we just kind of move from one thing to another, sometimes multitask. And it's really hard to measure, oh, that was design and that was consultancy and that was production and this was, I don't know, model testing, whatever, all these different parts of the project, I guess they blend in. But what's interesting and important is that in the design phase, we're kind of gaining a bit more money and then losing on the building or vice versa sometimes in the project, so it's not always constant. The profitability factor changes depending on what sort of work you're doing, and that's why I think that oftentimes projects want to overlap. So how to organize your stages accordingly to be able to track it effectively.
So this is I love this particular feature of Monograph. I think it's the one that I think absolutely sets us apart because we've done this so well. The way I think about this problem is, yes, let's say SD, you're making a ton of money. DD, you're kind of like at par. You make at par also on CDs, but then you're like really behind on CA. Or as you said, vice versa. But as a project, you're still okay. Because like you've won some, you've lost some, you've still netted out like pretty good. Well, historically, most architects don't know how to do that because like there's multiple phases, there's like sub budgets for each phase, there's a total project budget. I think this hit me when I was one day driving from San Francisco to Tahoe. I needed a long weekend and wanted to go on a short ski trip. And I looked down, and every car has this, and it's your gas meter. And then it hit me. I was like, "That's what we're missing. We don't have a meter, right? Like the meter is so simple as a design. Let's say design.
Like a quantitative feature, basically, to show us through diagram, like through a diagram,
It's a
basically
diagram.
where we at.
Your gas meter on the car is a diagram that says like, well, if the needle's all the way to the right, it's completely full tank. I know to go from San Francisco to Tahoe is one full tank. I know that when I hit Sacramento, I'm halfway. So when I hit
Fabulous.
Sacramento, like, and I look at the gas meter, I'm like, I'm below the halfway mark. I need to readjust how fast I drive, start a little slower, or I need to like calibrate and pull over and fill up gas. But like I can intuitively know all this information by just seeing the gauge. So that's what we designed for Monograph. We designed our money GAN, which is a gauge of where are you? Like if you're gonna be a little bit ahead or a little bit behind, that's okay as long as you can visually see it and you can make your own intelligent decisions based on that gauge. If you're gonna spend a lot up front, that means you got to spend a little less at the end. And if you're spending less up front, then you have a little bit more wiggle room later. Or 1 week at a time, you can start to like really toggle because it's in real time. The gauge has to be in real time. But the concept is really, really simple. Like a simple gauge can solve a lot of problems.
I love it. I just love how that whole story started because indeed, a trip from San Francisco to Tahoe, it's a journey, and it's very parallel to when you're starting a project. It's like you're starting with a vision. You have to go through all these different stops and these different milestones before you arrive to your final destination. And for us in architecture, that sometimes takes years. I mean, it can be a 2-year process, a 5-year process. So therefore, with all the other things happening, exciting projects, competitions, whatever we're doing, it's easy to lose track on the project that's, there for 5 years. So I think having that for every project is fabulous. And I love, how that translates again to that journey, that car journey from San Francisco to Tahoe.
Keeping it simple really matters. Because I think as architects, we can track on a task level. We can track on like a drawing by drawing, a sheet by sheet perspective. But at the end of the day, like really, what's really, really impactful is like I just need a gauge of the whole thing. Simple gauge. And what's most important with a gauge, and we talked about like here and there as a destination. The thing that makes Monograph really impactful is the destination without time is not a good, let's say, diagram. The diagram has to include time. So like you can say we have 5 phases of work, but the timeline is 5 years. Okay. So by 2.5 year is my meter at halfway mark. Because it should be.
Yeah.
If it's not, then I can make my own decisions. If we only have a gauge without time, then you still can't make really intelligent decisions because you just don't know, like, well, is this a 1-year project or 5-year project? Because like I'm gonna behave very differently depending on that gauge. So the gauge itself, which is a design problem. How do you make it really, really simple, and how does it relate to time?
I love that. So we talked a little bit about time, project stages, planning, and all that stuff. I wanted to talk specifically about profitability because at the end of the day, that's kind of one of the goals and outcomes of it all. Like, I think that as much as it's great to be organized, the sort of real tangible result of being organized is being able to save the money and the time, of course. But yeah, money is time. We already established that. And in fact, that would be a direct measure of whether or not your business is profitable, and to actually be able to look at each stage and how can you maybe take a different decision or shift a little bit your actions in order to actually, hit better profits. So how is that journey evolving around profitability? Is there, what would be maybe the usual outcome that happens for a practice that starts using Monograph, sort of realizations or lessons learned from being able to actually look at how profitable or non-profitable you are at different stages?
I think that's a really good question, and it ties back in with the gauge, with the money gap.
Yeah.
The way you set, like, let's say what a full tank means is it includes profit. So
Yeah.
then, because we have to gauge on the project level and we have a gauge on the phase level. If you finish a phase and you didn't reach empty, you're profitable. It could be that simple. So you plan projects with profitability in mind. You shouldn't be planning profitability as an afterthought, because then it becomes hard. It becomes hard to make sure that the outcome you desire is actually planned and facilitated against. So profit needs to be thought of right at the very beginning. It needs to be included within your plan in Monograph, so we can track against it.
So interesting. And I'm guessing, from that data obviously come lessons. I know that you guys put a lot of attention on education and generally, good content creation around Monograph to teach people really about those principles that you operate within, help people be profitable, have better time management, team management, and things like that. So again, what would be the things that we would be learning as we make mistakes and navigate through that by now being able to actually measure, and see the results measured of our actions?
I think our customers can learn a lot, almost. I don't know the exact figure, but a large percentage of our customer base have grown and they have added designers and architects to their practice. So much so, like it has a massive influence here at Monograph. So I know a lot of the firms are more profitable with Monograph because they've grown with Monograph. I think what you learn a lot can vary. So on projects that are very successful, you get to like understand, well, why was it successful? Where was it successful? Who contributed to its success? These are all really, really important questions to answer for every firm. And for projects that aren't as successful, to also ask the same questions. Well, why wasn't it? Was it external reasons? Was it internal reasons? Was it a combination of both? And how do we do better? I think giving everyone a baseline to work off of is the first step. I think
Mm-hmm.
when you don't have the data and you don't have, let's say, a tool, you essentially don't have a baseline. And not having a baseline means really hard to iterate on and really hard to grow from. Um, this is why like sometimes like I really miss school, because school is very structured. You go one studio after another, and you know your baseline because you can always look back to your very first class, your very first studio, and your current studio, and like you just look at your work, like is it better? And you should be really happy because like it is better. Like you've gained more design skills, you've sharpened your eye, you've learned more tools to execute as an architecture student. So by year 4, you're definitely better than year 1. But there's a baseline because you're using year 1 as your as your starting point. When running a practice, the question is, well, where is your starting point? What are you going to compare yourself to? If you don't have the data, it's hard to improve because you don't know where you're improving from.
I think that listening to you, I think something else came to mind. It's, having clarity on your decisions. Because if you think about it, both leading an architecture project and leading a practice means that you have to take a lot of decisions. And if we cannot quantify that data and have a reason behind why we're deciding to cut down staff, employ another person, sometimes those decisions might not be necessarily fully informed. And we're like, is this really good for me to hire now? Or should we cut on our cost? But once you have like this measured data attached to time and effort of your team, it's much easier to stick by your decision, see it clearly in front of you, like this is certainly an action we have to take, this is in the red zone, this is what we're not doing correctly. And just kind of getting that clarity, I think it's extremely important. Someone once says that there's just so many decisions we can make in a day, and I think the design is already quite decision heavy process. So it just makes makes this process perhaps easier on the brain, to have more clarity, on running projects and the team equally once you can access that data. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I think that's the goal here at Monograph. Like, can we simplify the life of running a practice and running a project down so much that it's so easy, you get so much time back to do what I would love every architect and every one of my friends to focus on, which spend that time on like the creative process,
Yeah.
design a better world. Architects are that important. Like the homes we live in, the schools we go to, the offices we go visit, the travel that we go and see, and the communities we go and visit are all built by architects. If you have any more extra creative time, spend it on your passion. There's all and that's also me recognizing like I can't create more time. It doesn't
Yeah.
like I don't have that gift. There's only 24 hours in a day, and a big chunk of that we have to sleep. So there's a finite number of time in hours. What I can do is really try to make your life of running a practice or a project so simple that you actually get time back to be creative.
Absolutely. That's a good point. So you guys added a new tool to Monograph, related to adjustable building rates. Maybe I want to ask you first, why did you do that? Why was it important to create that adjustment?
Oh, it's really important. Ray, at the beginning, we talked a lot about time, tracking time and timesheets. Um, but we also know like an architectural project can be really long. Uh, when I was at SOM, like projects could be a decade long, depending on the complexity, depending on the scale. And projects, even on a really small scale, is still months, if not years. Um, what's also really important is to understand like what the current global world we live in today is. What's going on? We have COVID. We have a pandemic. We have people working from home. We have the way we work is changing really fast, and we have hyperinflation. The cost to buy like milk and eggs at the grocery store and gas has skyrocketed. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's just the beginning. I think the cost of living is going to continue to grow. And I think this is probably not a surprise that architecture fees should also grow with it. Right, like you can't be charging rates that are like 10 years old today. Like you
Mm-hmm.
won't make enough. Um, so all these kind of fit into a problem set. I was like, well, we are solving for timesheets, but we're not doing a great job until we essentially solve for how do we solve for time and value as it changes throughout a project.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really hard problem that we invested a lot of time in 2022 solving, and I'm really proud of the entire Monograph team uh, for like coming up with a solution and releasing it uh, beginning of January of 2023, where what we call adjustable billing rates. It allows for an architect to change a rate at any time, beginning of a project, midway through a project, whenever you need to, and the accuracy of all of our reports will stay true. So any rates that were like in the past will stay with that rate. Any rate on the new time will now be presented on the new time. Accuracy is important, so like now you can make better decisions. Um, I'm really proud of this because it's really complicated to build. On the technology side, to allow for any architect to change your rates at any moment in time, but the project continues, and we have better reports and we have better forecasting. Is really really hard enough that I do not believe other companies have solved this problem. uh,
Mm-hmm.
Most solutions, you set a rate and you work against that rate until the project's done, and then you set a new rate. But that's not reality. Like the reality is like rates need to go up now. Like it's problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to give architects the tools to navigate through the current times.
Mm-hmm. So right. So this is all very kind of simple, I think, and very intuitive. It sounds like a great tool to have. But let's just say that someone operates their practice in, perhaps a disorganized manner, has not been using tools like this, or maybe has been using tools that were not effective. What would the traditional onboarding process look like?
Uh,
Do I have to
um,
learn a lot? Will I just get introduced to the tool, but then I have to add my own flow into it and figure out my stages and things like that on my own, or do we get help from your team, depending on what we're doing specifically for our practice and how we can use the tool for a specific of our practice? How is that sort of process look like for someone who's joining?
my mission is to help architects, and we will always have a hand extended to help, always. So like, and I'm also extraordinarily proud of Eileen, who leads our customer success team. Uh, we help. We're there every step of the way. Uh, from a product engineering perspective, we work really hard to make sure the product is extraordinarily simple. If you can use a smartphone, uh, you should be able to use Monograph. Now, if you can't use a smartphone, that might be a really hard learning curve. Uh, but like that's the mantra of our product team and our engineering team. Like, yes, all the fancy and complicated algorithms are under the hood. What an architect experiences should be so simple that there is no learning curve. But if there is, we have an incredible success team, world class. We have a 30-day, 60-day, 90-day course where we kind of walk through every single customer in terms of like what you need to accomplish. And we're there for you. We're
Yeah,
always
it's
there.
great you
We'll
mentioned that.
always invest in our customer success team because I think this is new. We have to understand that for architects. So like the money side has always been tricky for architects. The business side has always been difficult to learn. Our tool absolutely helps, but we're partners. If you choose to go with Monograph, we see you as coming in and investing in us so we can continue to build more product and solve more problems. So we are partners on a really long journey. I tell my team internally, like, we start with architecture, but the goal is to really have massive impacts across the entire built environment. The problems start with architecture, but they don't stop. And an architect's job also don't stop in architecture, right? An architect's job goes past procurement and bidding and into CA and into the building phase. And even afterwards, there's still maintenance, additions, and remodels that happens like after the building's done. So like we keep solving problems. Our customer success team is really, really important because every customer of ours is a partner. And every partner informs of how do we solve problems better, and they make it feasible for us to keep our mission alive.
Absolutely. Wow, that was wonderful. So, Robert, if anyone wanted to know more about Monograph, where do they go to find it?
It's really easy. It's just monograph.com. You can also have my direct email, which is robert@monograph.com. I would love to meet anyone that's interested. My job is always to be in service.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a great conversation. And thank you for everyone tuning in and listening in. And we'll see you all at the next one.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.